Abigail Wozniak has an extraordinary CV out of Chicago and Harvard, her tour of duty in Notre Dame, and here she is now at Minneapolis. What you need to know is Minneapolis owns the high ground on children education in America. Professor, wonderful to have you with us. You have written on the inequalities of this virus. We are living it now in July, August, and into September with public school kids crushed by budgets, fiscal, the rest, and fancy private school kids actually maybe will be able to go back to school. That's just one inequality that we have. How do we solve this?
Right. So I think that one of the things that we really want to highlight coming out of the latest research is something that I think is going to help us think about the trade-offs of some of the policies governors are considering reimposing. And of course, any progress that we make in containing the virus is going to have serious ramifications for our children. What we want to highlight is the fact that after a few months and weeks with this virus, we've been able to understand what's happening to labor markets in places where different policies have been adopted. And a really striking finding coming out of many pieces of research, I've seen this repeatedly in very timely research seminars this early summer, is that states that have had strict and early lockdowns are seeing labor market changes that are really just as significant as states that did not lock down. So what that's telling us is that the economic impacts of the virus are happening regardless of the specific lockdown measures states put in place.
What we've witnessed here, and John Farrow, as the foreigner from England, has really noticed this, it's without question the gains of the stimulus has gone to Wall Street. We saw this with Morgan Stanley's earnings and, the rest of them, Goldman Sachs and all. What is the policy prescription you would advocate so that we get a bit of equality across society right now in the crisis?
Yeah, so I think with this new information that we have that the virus contraction is hitting all states regardless of their shutdown practices, we really see that it's imperative that support continue for workers and small and medium-sized businesses. And I think some of the evidence that we're seeing on consumer finances, so from researchers who have access to, for example, bank account and credit card spending data, even for very low income households, we can sometimes see them in such data. It really does look like some of these fiscal policies have definitely made it to those households. Now, that doesn't mean that that's erased the financial hardship of the pandemic. For many households, they're treading water. For many households, they're still facing significant financial uncertainty. We see that in the data that I study that looks at food insecurity and inability to make mortgage payments on time. But it would be an overstatement to say that those stimulus and extended benefits packages that were in place under the CARES Act, it would be an overstatement to say that they haven't made it to Main Street or to many American households. What we need is to have those policies likely continue, because we are right back where we started. In fact, we're even worse off right now in terms of the virus. And so engaging in a second round of such packages, I think could help prevent an economic disaster that will follow as the virus continues to spread in the next couple of weeks.
Abigail, what you're saying is so powerful. Let me repeat it. There is no connection between labor markets and virus protection policy. What does that mean for reopening? There are some people that think we could see some divergence across states, say New York, across some of the states across the Sun Belt, for instance. Are you saying that we won't see that divergence?
We will not see nearly as much divergence as I think people expect. I think people have come to view containment policy as a trade-off, where if we engage in containment policy, we are going to lose out economically. And they're seeing them as kind of a one-to-one trade-off. And what we've come to learn is that this is much more of an investment. If you invest in containment policy now, it pays benefits in that your economy can open sooner and faster. And the reason we're not seeing as much of a connection, that one-to-one trade-off, is that people are making behavior changes on their own. That's a first reason. And so folks are just not going to go out and they're not going to spend at the same levels if they feel insecure about their family's safety and their own health. The other reason we're not seeing that divergence that we might expect is that state economies are connected to one another. So if one of them is very slowed down, it's going to affect other state economies throughout the US. So what we're seeing is that the labor market is not the same as the virus market.
Abigail, this is such an important point, and you say shutdown orders work. They work not only to control the virus, but for the economy. That said, if there is not some sort of lockdown, if there isn't a stricter enforcement of some of these policies to constrain the virus, is any extra stimulus throwing money, good money after bad, this idea that the bridge to the other side is becoming a bridge to nowhere?
So frankly, I share some of those concerns. I see concerns that folks have about these packages. What we also see in the data is that significant numbers of folks are very concerned about their ability to continue to stay in their housing. We know that housing disruption is significant for families that experience it, and it would be significant for our cities and communities. I think, in my view, preventing large-scale housing displacement when the next round of mortgage payments and rent payments come due is really critical. So some of this policy, I definitely agree, it's a challenge to think of exactly the right level, but we need to prevent that next wave of collapse.
Professor, one final question, unfair, but it is the heritage of the Minneapolis Fed folks. They own pre-school education, nursery school education, and all the benefits of that. Abigail Wozniak, really simply, does distance learning work for kids? I haven't observed it. Tell me it works, please.
I'm sad to say that it does not work well, particularly for disadvantaged students. Really striking data from Brown University looking at, they actually had a study in progress, is my understanding, when the pandemic hit, tracking students' performance using one of these online math modules that I think a lot of us have probably encountered now, even though we didn't go to school with them when we were growing up. They kind of were collecting this data in the background. Pandemic hit, you can see how much learning loss has happened for students overall across the board, but most significantly for students from lower income households. So it's certainly helpful to have in place, but it's not a good substitute. It's not making up the ground. And I think we need to think really seriously about how we're going to put that back. These are, again, investments that we've foregone in the last couple of months. How are we going to make this up to our children in the coming months and years when the pandemic has passed?